Okay, I think 3 minutes is probably enough of a grace period, so we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Just as a reminder, today you're here for our webinar on Anvil Workflows. This is part of our Anvil platform webinar series. We've had two previous webinars, two on our PDF services and two on our Etch eSign product. And today we're going to be going into our workflows. This is part one of many. I'm not exactly sure how many, but today we're going to be covering the basics of building workflows with Anvil. So with you today, you have myself, Sophie, and then you have Amy Yang, our technical product support specialist. The two of us are usually living behind this work channel, so we see some familiar faces in here. We've probably interacted with you before. And then we work closely with our Anvil customers kind of every day using all of our Anvil products, but we particularly love working with our customers who are building with Anvil workflows. And that is what we're here to talk to you about today. And just really quickly, as we're going through the webinar today, please drop your questions at the Q&A. We're gonna have some time at the end of the presentation to address those. And just an overview of how we're gonna do today is I'm gonna give the high level, how you would build a workflow, just the basics today. And then Amy is gonna go into a demonstration. Cool. So just a little bit about Anvil for those of you who are not familiar, although again, I know some folks are. We talk about ourselves at Anvil as developer first infrastructure for building software that automates paperwork. So just to break that down a little bit, when we talk about paperwork, we're talking about data collection, PDF preparation, and then finally e-signatures. And the way we allow you to automate all those aspects of paperwork is we give you tools for each. So we have our web forms, which is the data collection piece. We have our PDF services, which is that PDF filling and creation piece. And then we have our Etch e-signature, which is for building signatures into your application. And then finally, tying it all together, we have our workflows product, which we're going to get into today. So workflow, pretty much every SaaS product out there has something they call a workflow. So what does that mean at Anvil, since it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people? In the Anvil world specifically, a workflow is a way of automating an entire document-based process from web forms for data collection to PDF filling to e-signatures. And the result of the workflow is a set of documents plus the payload of data generated from that workflow. And the really amazing thing about Anvil Workflows is all of that is wrapped up in this logic-driven decision engine that takes the work of decision-making from the person completing the document and also the work of managing the process and offloads that into the workflow. So we're not here today to sell Anvil Workflows. We're here to talk about how you build them, but I do think it's important to keep in mind what you're trying to accomplish with your workflow as you're building it. And so thinking about what the advantages you're trying to bring to your users and what are the unique advantages of Anvil. So at a high level, what makes Anvil Workflows so special is that we abstract the PDF into a web form based embeddable experience that creates a lot of advantages for your users who are interacting with the paperwork. So for one, paperwork is now mobile friendly, which is kind of an incredible thing. If you've ever tried to complete a PDF document on your phone, you know it's pretty painful. For myself, trying to sign my lease document on a phone was pretty painful. There's a lot of like zooming, a lot of trying to get to the right page, a lot of not being able to see. So by abstracting that paperwork into a web form based experience, we're able to handle a lot of the more challenging elements of a form, like tables, for example. Another advantage for your users is paperwork can now be done in any language. If you have government documents that are in English, but you have users that are more comfortable speaking Spanish or reading Spanish, they can interact with the paperwork in the language that is most familiar to them. And then following up on that, complex paperwork can be done in multiple sessions, especially when we're getting into the kind of really complex document workflows that Anvil is well suited for. Doing that in one sitting is not really feasible or how a user would like to do that paperwork. So allowing people to save their progress and at any time come back and complete their paperwork over multiple sessions is a great user experience. And then finally, just making paperwork a link-based system that allows users to access it in a variety of ways, including inside your own application, and then giving them the confidence that their data is secure. So that's for the user side of things, what you're trying to give them with an Anvil workflow. And on the operator side of things, this is a soft spot for me. I have a strong personal philosophy that well-placed, true technology really unlocks the power of people behind technology. So thinking about what that means in the Anvil workflow context, Anvil workflows are purpose-built to complete a set of documents, which means that setting up the workflow is actually quite fast relative to other solutions or how you might do this without a workflow solution. We have UI for common needs like encoding form instructions, mapping Webform fields to PDFs, and also setting up signatures without having to stitch together many different systems for different parts of that paperwork process or building the whole thing from scratch. And then beyond the initial setup, a huge time suck for any team that has managed paperwork in the past or document-heavy processes is just inefficiently using data that you have or that you've asked for. So what you really want to do with an online paperwork experience is create a one-to-many mapping for your data. You want to be able to take one piece of data and flexibly reuse it anywhere in your paperwork or anywhere in your process to avoid redundant work. So you want to be able to add new paperwork, add new forms, add more steps without having to go back and rethink about how you're asking for that information. And then finally, there's the processing of that data, which is kind of crazy to think about. There's the process of getting the paperwork from the user onto the PDF, then off of the PDF into your system. That should all be stuff that a computer does. And then finally, each of these individual aspects of paperwork, data collection via a web form, PDF filling, e-signatures are all individual time savers, but putting them all together is really what unlocks the operational efficiency of offloading that work of manual process management from people into a programmatic workflow. So now you know why we're building the workflow and you have in mind the advantages you're trying to create with it. And now we have to get into actually how you build it. So understanding what you're trying to accomplish at a high level, you're going to be adding documents. And again, this is sort of the unique part of Anvil workflows. You start with documents, then it's mapping your PDF fields for filling. And then finally thirdly, customizing the web form for data capture and then configuring your signers. So this looks kind of like a linear process, but one thing Amy and I want to emphasize today is that it's really iterative. And so in the process of building your workflow, you're going to be toggling back and forth between these steps quite a bit. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the actual process of building the workflow, and I want to make sure I leave time for Amy. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. We really recommend investing time in creating document templates before jumping into building your workflows. We've covered that in a previous webinar. We can be sure to link out to that following this so you have access to that information. But high level, it's just 3 steps. It's uploading your PDFs or docx documents to the Anvil template builder. Then it's identifying your fields, which Anvil will actually do for you for fillable PDFs. And then finally, it's tagging them with the appropriate name and field type. So starting with your document templates, again, you want to start with those before creating your workflows. But then once you are creating your workflows with the document templates, there are 3 different ways to fill your PDFs from a workflow. So the first is a data from a web form. Anvil is going to assume this is how you want to fill your documents, and it's going to auto-generate web form fields from your documents. And this is why you want to invest the time in creating those nice templates with sort of legible titles and the appropriate field tags. So you can fill fields from a web form. It's going to auto-generate those fields. So in the example of, onboarding documents, you're going to have an employee provide their information, their name, their email, their birthday, etc. That's one way to fill fields. Another way to fill fields is actually data that you already have. Let's say it's in the example of the employee, it's a rehire. You already know a bit about them. Maybe you already have their name, you already have their information, or you have information about the employer that you want to provide to the set of documents. You're also able to do that with Anvil Workflows. We'll kind of cover the specifics of that in a later webinar. And then finally, you can fill fields with literal values. So this is if a value is never going to change. Let's say your employer address, you're never going to change that, or not for this set of documents. You don't need to get that either from your system or get it from the user. You can always pass the same static piece of information to a PDF. Then next, this is really where you're going to spend the majority of your time when building your workflows, is creating a great UX for your user, and the way they interact with the workflow is through the web form. So it's really investing time in customizing your web form. If you've already done the work of the templates, this is going to save you a lot of time and minimize your work, especially on the renaming fields part, or the creating your PDF fields and those connections. Again, Anvil is going to automatically connect those PDF fields to the web form fields, but there may be some cleanup you need to do. And I personally like to rename fields. If you have employee name in a web form, you may want to instead make that what is your name. So thinking through the user experience like that. You also want to group fields logically for users. Like, again, this is going back to what makes abstracting the web form away from the PDF such a great user experience, is you can think about how a user would like to interact with this paperwork versus how they would need to if they were interfacing with the PDF itself. So you may want to group all the questions about a user's basic information. Those should probably all go together. Then you may want to have another group of questions that's more related to their financial information or something like that. So the next step after you've renamed all the fields, checked your PDF connections, is really grouping those logically and then adding page breaks to try to break up the experience for the user, so they're not scrolling through some massive long web form and can just sort of swipe, especially if they're on a phone. That's extremely helpful. And then the next step is really to try to create a guided experience for your users. So one way to do that is to add explanation text, just sort of replacing those form instructions that someone would typically be reading through as they're trying to complete some paperwork, or anticipating any clarifying questions someone may have. So you can add definitions, add other types of explanation that will help guide someone through the experience. And then lastly, it's adding logic to offload that decision making from users and just into the form itself. So speaking about that logic, majority of the decision making that users have to do when they're completing paperwork falls into one of two categories. It's deciding if they need some follow-up information about a particular thing that they've said. So for example, common follow-up question would be, if you're married, you may need to provide some information about your spouse. That's one category of information. The other is really steering them away from questions that are not relevant to them. So if you don't have a spouse, don't ask for that set of questions about the spouse. And also don't put that decision on your user to decide whether they need to provide spouse information or not, which could lead to you actually missing some information that you need to collect. So really just creating logic around, yes, I need more information. No, I don't need this information. And then finally, signers. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, just cognizant of the time here. And I think that we will see this in Amy's demo, but the simple matter of making sure you have name and email fields for your signers in your web form so you can capture that data, then configuring the signers in the signer modal, adding their name and their email, and creating them as signers, declaring what order you want someone to sign in, so a first, second, third. Anvil does require that you make a signing order, but if, for example, there is no signer two, let's in the example of the spouse, there is no spouse, but the spouse is the second signer. Anvil is smart enough to know to just skip that signer, but you will need to declare signers. And then finally, tag the appropriate signature fields to the signer that needs to sign them in your PDFs. Last steps, that's the overall setup of your workflow. And again, you'll probably go back and forth between those different steps as you're iterating on the paperwork. And you'll know whether you need to go back and revisit, a set of logic or add another PDF or change something on the PDF based on your testing. So we really would encourage you to test a lot as you're building. You can test the Webform experience itself from the builder, and Amy will show that in the demonstration as well. So if you want to test what the user experience of the Webform is like, things like logic, things like explanation text, you can do that from the builder. We also encourage you to test an entire workflow end to end. So everything from completing the web form through to signing, and then finally the output documents. One note is you should use your Anvil email, whatever your logged in email is, when you're testing the entire workflow to get a sense for what the user experience is like. And then last but not least, part of this testing and iterative building is using our versions. Version history is super powerful for a couple of reasons. One, you're able to, every time you make a change, you can make a note on what that version includes, what the changes you made are, so that you can understand the difference between versions and easily roll back to a previous version if something is broken or you don't like how you change something. So we make that extremely easy to toggle between versions and see your changes between versions. And then for some industries, you also need to tag or you need to tie different submissions to different versions of your workflow or your paperwork in the workflow. I know this is a common experience for insurance in particular, and so we make this really easy for you out of the box. And with 10 minutes left, sorry, Amy, had to kind of rush through that. Handing it over to you for a demo.
All right, thanks, Sophie. I'm going to show you how to build a workflow. So Sophie covered a lot of the processes, so now we're actually going to show it in action. So this is our workflow dashboard, and you can see I have some existing ones, but today we're really going to focus on creating a new one. So I'm going to create a workflow here. And there are several ways that you can get a document started, you can get your workflow started with a document, without a document. Today, I'm specifically going to use a template, which Sophie mentioned there's a lot of benefits to doing, and you're going to see pretty much now. I'm going to start with one. So start with documents. And you can see one thing that Anvil did automatically was it showed me my PDF on the right, and then it automatically created a web form for me on the left based on the fields that I set up in my PDF template. So the great thing is a lot of this work is done for me. I don't have to manually map these fields one by one. I don't have to create these fields one by one because I spent that upfront time on my template. One thing you might notice on the template over here is that there's a lot of green boxes with these little connected plugged in icons, and then there's a few that are blue and they don't have this icon. So just what this means is there is a connected web form field that's outputting data onto my PDF field, and the blue ones are not yet connected. And so this is really great. This calls back to a little bit about what Sophie was saying, how you can use one piece of information over and over again. In this current example, I only have one PDF. But let's say I have 5 and they all need a name field, rather than filling out a name field 5 times like you would if you were filling out traditional PDFs or traditional paperwork. You only have to fill it out once, and then it can be mapped to all 5 of your fields to save your user time. So we're going to focus specifically on how you can build this really great UX on your web form, especially now that all these fields have been generated for me. So one quick thing, if you look at it, there's a lot of categories that fall under maybe somebody's basic information, like their name, their address, date of birth. And then there's some other questions down here that relate specifically to your citizenship status in the US. And so I would like to break this up into 2 separate pages on my web form, and I can quickly do that by adding in a page break here. And as you can see, this is now page 2, and this is page 1. Something else that you might want to spend some time with up front is your field types. So Anvil's great. We offer a lot of different type of fields, and it's great for field validation. It's for quick formatting. It's for making sure that things are inputted the correct way and the correct data type. So in the example of a name field and another name field, you can see this one's a short text field specifically, and this one is a name field. And what that does with a name field is it has the first name, middle initial, and last name all in one row, versus if I chose to use other name field like this one, everything is short text, I'd have to have 4 separate fields, one for my first name, one for my middle, one for my last, and one for another name. So setting up your right field types is really great in that it can collapse information like this for your users, making it a lot more streamlined. It also offers things like field validation for like US address or date of birth. You can choose if you want a date dropdown or if you want a calendar picker. In my example here, a social security number is a short text field. We can actually choose a social security field type. And as you can see, there is some placeholder information filled in for me, and it will also do on the PDF is formatted correctly. So it's 3 digits, 2 digits, and 4 digits. So that's a really great place to start your basic setup of your web form to make sure everything is the correct field if it wasn't already configured on your PDF template. Another thing is you might want to change the titles, which is simple, but is a really good UX experience. Rather than seeing something like I-9 paper version, you can say personal information, which really comes in handy when you have multiple pages. Like my next page, rather than being new page, you can specifically say this is citizenship details. And taking it a step further, you can also add explanation text like Sophie said. So you can add instructions in here, embedding it rather than on a PDF where you'd have to read, start here. If you need more information, go on to page 3. Like all of that can be baked into your web form. And you can even add personal touches. So this would technically be my employee onboarding. So I want to name it as such. And you might want to add a fun message, and it also supports Markdown. So in bold, I want to say, welcome to the team. And we also support things like emojis here. So you can really personalize what you say to your users, your end users on this form, and streamline the experience for them. So there could be instructions here. Please fill out the questions and let a team member know when you're done. Or if you have questions, Anvil will let them know when you're done. All right, so those are just some really basic things on how you can personalize and streamline it. But another thing, like just now, you could see if you move on and you look at the page details, it added a page directly underneath my first page because that's where I chose to add a page. And I can reorder that so it makes more sense. So when you're going through your workflow, you can see, oh, it starts on the first page, employee onboarding, moves on logically. Speaking of logic, one other thing you might want to consider, looking at my PDF here, there is something here called a USCIS number, and I don't need to ask this for every single citizenship type, for example, citizen, non-citizen, permanent resident. I only want to ask it if you are a permanent resident or if you are a non-citizen authorized to work. So calling back to Sophie's statement about keeping questions relevant to the user, you can add logic to an individual field, to pages, to a PDF page to make sure your users only ever asking questions that make sense to them. So field logic is really easy to add. You can click on the field and add a condition, and you can choose which field you want to base it off of. So this is available to non-citizens is checked, then I will show this field. You can also add additional conditions. So this one is also relevant to the non-citizens authorized to work. So I can pick that out. And you can see earlier, any subsequent conditions after the first one can be added as and or statements. For this one, I'm specifically picking or because you can pick either or. And then you can also test this logic. So if you click on this play button, it will go into test mode, and you can see there's no USCIS number available now because nothing is checked. And the same thing applies, like if you check US citizen, you check non-citizen, it'll pop up. If you click permanent resident, it will also pop up, non-citizen authorized to work. So that's one way that you can check if the logic makes sense for your user. Now, another thing that you want to do perhaps is connect signers. Before I do that, I'm going to show you really quickly how you can easily add another document. Let's say you're building a workflow and you think, oh, I forgot an employee document. you can quickly go in and add a new one. So I'm going to actually add in a background check. And I can reuse that piece of information on here. So that name field, you can see, can also be connected from my web form field, and that connects everything up very, very quickly. Other name field also available. Now I'm going to set up the signatures, which I can reuse on both documents as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add an employee. And the great thing about Anvil here is you can set up signatures dynamically. So rather than having to put in Sophie is signing, here's Sophie's email, or Amy is signing, here's Amy's name, and here's Amy's email, you can choose whoever's filling out this web form. I want to capture that name and I want to capture that email. And that person is going to now be the employee who is signing. So I'm going to save that. And you can add it to other fields like your signature date. So I'm going to multi-select all of these at once. And I'm going to choose to reuse my primary signer, who is the employee. And the same thing can happen over here. Select all of these. And just like that, my signers are set up. Now, some things that you might want to iterate on as well as adding in any additional questions. For example, like here, years used for other names wasn't asked on my first form. This is something that you can very easily add later on. So this goes back to thinking about your web form logically. You're not just filling out individual PDFs one at a time. You're trying to think about the collective experience that your end user is going to have and how that information fits into where. So if I want to add here, oops, not a logic, I want to add in how many years have you used this name? And this really only pops up, and I want this to be a number type because I don't want them to put in words. You can change your validation, and you can also add in logic. So I only want this question to show up if somebody has filled in another name. So we're going to choose other name equals, oops, no, we're just going to go with filled. Perfect. And then again, you can test this as you're building it out. If you don't fill it in, nothing will show up. If you fill something in, something will show up. So that is how it works. So right now I'm going to say this is good to go. I want to save this for now and save and exit. For the sake of time, I've already filled out a form, so I can show you if you go back to it. Oops, sorry, I want to publish it. Let's go to your settings, publish it. As Sophie said, you can do V1. Basic setup is what I'm going to name this one. I'm going to publish it now. And here is where you could launch a full test submission and test everything end to end. So I have one filled out here, which I'm going to click on. So you can see everything is filled in, personal name, all this detail is in here. And then onto the next page, everything's been filled out. This one, by the way, is a little bit more cleaned up, so you can spend more time to make it even cleaner for your users. So I'm going to review, and you can see all their information filled out here. You can also edit the information as you're filling out, and then you can finish and submit and review and sign. And once a person has reviewed and signed, they can see everything plugged into their document, and you can choose to click into the signatures one by one or sign all of them. And that is a cleaned up user experience. Now going back to I'm a person using admin as an admin on Anvil, I want to see the final paper as well. You can see it on their file output, and you can see this one filled out both the I-9 as well as the background check. And if you notice something's wrong with it, like, hey, I realized I have some issues with my I-9, my social security wasn't hooked up here properly. Maybe you hooked it up properly in the past or you want to in the future. You can always at any time, sorry, let me find the correct one, this one. Going back to it, you can go to your settings and you can go to your version history and you can see version 4, 3, 2, 1 along with any notes I added. And as you can click on them, you can see what fields changed and where. And you can also choose to edit the version information so you can update those notes, or you can revert to this version as well. So that's it for a really basic summary. I'm going to hand this back to Sophie.
Thanks, Amy. Just gonna grab the screen share back 1 second. Cool. I think we're pretty much at time. Just doing a quick check to see if we have any Q&A. I don't actually see any, and given that we're over time, we'll probably just skip this for now. But if folks have any questions, please email us at support@useanvil.com. Again, Amy and I are living behind that all the time. And so we will be there to answer any questions about our workflows that you might have. And then finally, before we leave you today, we do have a part 2 coming up. This is going to be on advanced workflow building, so getting into our more advanced features beyond the basic setup that we showed you today, such as those listed here. And we will be sending you an email with event details and how to register. And again, I don't think any questions, so I think we're going to leave it there for the day, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank you.